Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the ideal list of romantic string music. And I mean romantic string music. That is from what we call in the musicology biz, the long 19th century. That means we can dribble a little bit over the edges just to make the point, because periodicity does not happen just because we happen to turn the calendar clock from one century to another. I vividly remember having these discussions with some early music friends who talk about things sometimes with excessive periodicity, the 19th century versus the 18th century. Well, we're going to deal with one composer who proves that periodicity is kind of like pointless and nonsensical, but we'll get to that in a moment. First, let's talk about these pieces. They're all written for string orchestra, and here are the parameters. They're all string orchestra pieces, but only one of them is a transcription. And to the extent some of them exist in multimedia, for example, piano versions and string versions, all of the versions were made by the composers, not by other people. As I said, there is one exception that we'll get to in a moment. But let's get started, because I have a hefty, here we go, a major pile. Here's the pile of stuff to get through and mention. Some of this stuff isn't even in here. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 musical examples that we're going to play, because some of this stuff does not exist on multiple recordings, and I want you to hear it because you may not know it. Most of my ideal lists are things which are in the basic repertoire, and I limit it to that. But I think that music for string orchestra is such a luscious and yummy medium, and we have so many opportunities to find really good pieces. Really good music that just doesn't get played or isn't well known, but that perfectly suits the parameters we have in mind. Not just written for string orchestra, but pieces that are delightful and luscious and yummy and fun to listen to, and they just check all the boxes. They have great tunes. If you want to do more of the world's greatest melodies, you'll find a batch of them in here. I have no doubt whatsoever. So let's get started. And we have to get started with the long 18th century, because the first piece of romantic string music really is Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. So we're starting a couple decades early, but when you think about the basic repertoire for string orchestra that isn't Baroque, that doesn't have like a continuo part, that gets played by modern orchestras all the time, that's in the repertoire, the universe of string orchestra works begins with Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Everything before that is sort of Baroque-ish and earlier, and it just naturally goes with all of that other stuff. And so I am very, very pleased to begin with Eine kleine Nachtmusik. In the recording I've chosen fabulous recordings here, although where there's only one of them, we have no choice. So, you don't have to come up with your own list if you don't want to, or if you want to, you can use the same ones I use and substitute others. Do whatever you want. There's no point in making a big game out of this, because there's so much music and it's so lovely and it's so wonderful, and who cares, right? So anyway, Eine kleine Nachtmusik, George Sell and the Cleveland Orchestra. Yes, yummy, fabulous, terrific, amazing. What else is there to say? And after that, here is sort of the exception that proves the rule when it comes to periodicity. That exception is, what is this? Okay, got it. Rossini. Rossini's 6 string sonatas. Now, these are just delightful works. they're early. They are definitely of a classical sort of nature, even though they were written in the 19th century. But think about Rossini's years. He was 1792. He was born, just around the same time that Mozart died, a little bit later, and he died in 1868. And it was the Romantic period, and Rossini is known as both a classical composer and a romantic composer. He was both. He was squarely both. So these are more sort of classical period, but he was later a romantic composer. So, you can't go crazy when it comes to questions of periodicity. And these are the performances by I Musici, which are absolutely wonderful. But there are lots of performances of this music, and they're all very good. It's easy to play. It's delightful to listen to. And, the funny thing about Rossini is that when people think about great composers of the classical period, they usually leave him out. But when you think that Rossini stopped writing operas around 1829, which is around the same time that Schubert and Beethoven died, that was the end of the classical period and the beginning, really, of the Romantic period. Berlioz was just there, and of course he was old enough to know all of those later guys. Rossini was wonderful. Rossini just had, I think, I may have said this once before, I don't know, but I'm going to say it again. The best line in all of music, which was at Meyerbeer's funeral, when some composer, some nameless composer, wrote a funeral march in the memory of Meyerbeer and said to Rossini, "So, what do you think of my funeral march in memory of Meyerbeer?" And Rossini turned to him and said, "I think it would have been better if you had died and Meyerbeer had written your funeral march." Oh, you got to love the man, and you got to love this music. It's delightful. It's absolutely delightful. And when people think about great string orchestra works, how many times do they talk about Rossini? Seldom. And that's not right. Next, and the first bunches of pieces that we're going to have musical examples of, and this is all following a generally, vaguely chronological pattern, Mendelssohn's string symphonies. Now, there are 13 of them, and there's actually more because Mendelssohn orchestrated one of them. I mean, there's a string symphony that also is a full orchestral symphony, and one of them actually has timpani, cymbals, and some percussion parts in it, because he felt like doing that in one of them. I mean, it's not hard and fast, but basically there are 13 string symphonies. These are, I think, some of the most unjustly neglected and wonderful pieces in the entire string orchestra repertoire, especially when you get to the later ones. The first 6 are early and they're more pedagogical, but still very enjoyable to listen to. I mean, they're delightful. He was a child genius. He was like, I don't know, his mother had just had her first amniocentesis and out popped a string symphony. I mean, he was incredible as a prodigy. But the thing that's so fascinating about these works is that in them you can hear Mendelssohn basically following the entire pattern of symphonic development, beginning in North Germany with C.P.E. Bach and that style of 3-movement symphony, and then gradually enlarging his vision to take in Mozart and the Viennese school. And every single symphony is in advance over its predecessor in some respect, until when you get to the last bunch, the last 4 or 5, they're completely Mendelssohn. I mean, they're mature Mendelssohn effectively, and he's ready to go for the gusto and write full orchestral symphonies. And in fact, what was supposed to be his last string symphony actually became his first symphony in C minor for full orchestra. They're amazingly wonderful works, and I'm going to play you a little bit of one here. Let me see which one I've got here. I'm just trying to see. I don't even remember which one I picked out. Oh yes, here we are. This was String Symphony number 9. Right? Is it? Yes, it's number 9. It's absolutely lovely. The scherzo and trio. The trio is called La Suisse because it has a yodel in it. Remember like the Rossini yodeling thing in the William Tell Overture? That da 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 da. That's an actual Swiss cow calling yodel thing. That's what that is. And you'll hear something very similar to that in the trio of this scherzo. And it's only 2.5 minutes long, and I'm going to play you the whole blasted thing because you really should hear it and you should listen to these works. They are stunning. So here they are, played by the Northern Chamber Orchestra under Nicholas Ward on Naxos. There you go. charmant, isn't it? I mean, delightful, absolutely wonderful. But these are beautiful pieces with very, very sensitive and sometimes deeply pathetic slow movements and lots of interesting writing for the strings. They're really cool. So that's Mendelssohn. Next up, we get to, oh, well, we know this one, of course, Dvorak's Serenade for Strings. It's one of the most popular pieces for string orchestra in the world. It has a million different recordings. This one features the Prague Chamber Orchestra, which is conductorless, and oh, aren't they marvelous, on Supraphon. And I don't need to play it because you know what it sounds like, but the Dvorak Serenade for Strings is absolutely fabulous, and of course it has to be in any ideal list of wonderful works for string orchestra. And from just slightly later, this will surprise you, are the two great works for string orchestra by none other than Janacek. Believe it or not, Janacek. Yes, Janacek actually wrote the Suite for String Orchestra and the Idyll for String Orchestra, large works, like half an hour each, serious, large works. But he wrote them in the 1870s, in the mid-1870s. They're the earliest works of his for instrumental ensemble that we have. And they sound nothing like his later stuff. And they tend to get dumped on because they don't sound like later Janacek. They don't at all. They sound more like Dvorak, more like good sort of Middle European, sort of Central European string music. That's what they are. And there are elements where you hear that Czech folk sort of thing starting to peep through, but it isn't there yet. But even if it isn't, they're lovely, lovely works. And I'm going to play you a bit of the finale, which is an andante of the Suite for String Orchestra. This is with František Žilek and the Brno Philharmonic Orchestra on Supraphon. I like these performances because the orchestra is a little wiry. It has a little bit of edge, especially to the string timbre. You know, these pieces can be played too smoothly. Janacek is like that. Even at this early period, it's better to have a little bit of edge to the tone, a little bit of sharpness to the rhythm, you know, a little bit of a piercing quality, just to give the music that extra degree of individuality and passion and expressiveness. And these performances really have that. So here is a bit of the the andante finale of the Suite for Strings. Definitely belongs in your string orchestra collection, doesn't it? Let me put that away. And next, after Janacek, we go all the way up to Norway and Grieg. Now, Grieg wrote, a whole pile of stuff for string orchestra. The major work, of course, is the Holberg Suite, which is, oh God, I love the Holberg Suite. You know, it was a piano original. He later arranged it for string orchestra. It is so beautiful. It is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And, you know, but there's all this other stuff. You can get, let's see, 2 melodies for string orchestra, opus 53, and the 2 elegiac melodies, opus 34, and the 2 lyric pieces, opus 68, and the 2 Nordic melodies for string orchestra, opus 63. I mean, even Ozzy's Death, you know, from the Peer Gynt Suite, that's for string orchestra. It's just a string orchestra piece. So Grieg wrote lovely, wonderful music for string orchestra. There are also orchestrations of his string quartet, expansions of them for string orchestra. But the stuff that Grieg actually did, there are lots and lots of discs. In all those, we did a Grieg box video, you may recall, and we talked about all of these different Grieg boxes, and all of them have a disc of music for string orchestra, because there's a good discs worth of stuff. And this particular Naxos one features the Malmo Symphony Orchestra under Bjarte Engeset. And here is, just because I love it, the concluding bit of the Rigodon from the Holberg suite. I just love this so much. This ought to be one of the world's most beautiful melodies. In fact, every movement of this could be in there. But here is the conclusion of the Holberg suite. It really just gets under your skin, doesn't it? I mean, Grieg's music really does that. It has that quality that just won't go away. I mean, I remember somebody in the comments mentioned, what we thought of Wedding Day at Troldhaugen. And boy, is that an earworm of a piece. Remember that? Da 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 dum bum ba ba da 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 ba 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 da bum bum ba da dum bum ba da dum bum ba dum ba da. That got stuck in my head. And I swear to God, I almost had to be committed. I could not get it out of my head. I mean, waking or sleeping, all I heard was Wedding Day at Troldhaugen. And I've been to Troldhaugen. I wanted to burn down Troldhaugen just to get that thing out of my brain. It's a lovely little place, by the way. If you ever go to Norway, go to Troldhaugen. It's it's a Grieg museum, obviously. It's delightful. But Wedding Day at Troldhaugen, oh God. Anyway, so Grieg's music for string orchestra is delicious. And next there is Tchaikovsky. And here is where I make my one exception to the rule, because you can get a wonderful disc that has the Tchaikovsky Serenade for strings and a string orchestra arrangement of his sextet, Souvenir de Florence. Souvenir de Florence is so beautiful. I do not understand why people, again, they sort of dump on it as a chamber work. It is a magnificent piece of music. It's full of characteristic melody. It's a joy to listen to from beginning to end. It just makes me crazy that people don't give it the love and attention that it deserves. So I suggest you get a recording like this one with Philippe Entremont and the Vienna Chamber Orchestra on Naxos. And you can get a wonderful performance of the String Serenade along with a fabulous performance of the Souvenir de Florence. And here is the last movement, which is, again, it's as catchy and delicious a piece of music as anyone ever wrote anywhere. I mean, doesn't that sound like something you've heard before? Even if you haven't? I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that when I first heard it, I thought, oh, I've heard that. And I couldn't put my finger on what it was or who wrote it or, And finally I found out. I was like, oh, okay, it's Tchaikovsky. It's so beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And I also want to point out just another disc that is really quite handy to have. That's this classic Neville Mariner with the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. You get the Dvorak and Tchaikovsky Serenades and the Grieg Holberg suite all on one handy Decca disc. And I just have to mention it because it's such a great way to get all three works if you don't want to go for, multi-discs of like just Grieg, just Tchaikovsky, just Dvorak, this is a terrific string orchestra disc. It's really one of the best things that Mariner ever did. It really is. So, feel free to get that either as a supplement or as a first and only recording. It's entirely up to you. Now, after we do those guys, there is a whole passel of German works, and I can't play all of them, but for example, Reinecke wrote a very nice, very attractive string serenade, quite lovely. Folkmann wrote 3 lovely serenades for strings, but I think to symbolize the entire era and entire school of string serenade writing, the guy we need to talk to and that you have to have. I mean, Reinecke and Folkmann, you can take them or leave them. I mean, it's lovely music. It's delightful music. But if you really want to have some great, totally unknown and neglected music for string orchestra, you must get Robert Fuchs. Now, Robert Fuchs, he wrote a lot of music, but he spent most of his life as a teacher at the conservatory in Vienna, and boy, what a teacher he was. I mean, he taught everybody. He taught Sibelius, he taught Mahler, he taught Zemlinsky, he taught Hugo Wolf. I mean, he was everybody's composition teacher. He was just an amazing pedagogue, very, very highly respected. I mean, Brahms admired him, and he wrote 5 serenades. 3 of them are for string orchestra. One adds a couple of horns, and the last one, number 5, adds horns plus, single woodwind. But, so they're all little pieces, light pieces. He also wrote 3 symphonies in a very conservative style, but they're very attractive. His music is, you might expect, I mean, it's pedagogical in a way. It's extremely well made, but it's also tuneful and relaxed and joyous. There's something about sort of Viennese teachers who were also composers who were surprisingly appealing. I mean, just easy to listen to. Remember Fuchs, F-U-X? Fuchs, he wrote Gradus ad Parnassum, the ultimate composition treatise that Haydn taught himself to compose from, and everybody read it. His actual music, and it was written in the 17th century, most of it, it's full of folk tunes. It's light, it's relaxed, it's easy. He had this reputation as a fearsome pedagogue, but his music is just charming. The same is true of this guy, Fuchs, which means fox, Robert Fox, Fuchs. And these performances with the Cologne Chamber Orchestra with Christian Ludwig are on Naxos again, because Naxos records everything, and they've been doing it really, really well. There are other versions of individual serenades on other labels, but if you want to get them all, you have to get this series. It's 2 discs, and this disc has 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to play you, let me see, what am I going to play you? I'm going to play you a little bit the opening of, I think, Serenade number 2, which is an allegretto. Let me see what I'm doing here. Yes, the Serenade number 2, the first movement. And again, the charm of this music, the deliciousness of it, is completely and utterly disarming. You gotta love it. So, Robert Fuchs, take it away. I mean, what is there to say? I know you're going to rush out and get this disc immediately because you must have it. You need it. You desperately, desperately need it. Your life is going to be just a simmering puddle of murky unhappiness unless you get Robert Fuchs' Serenades. So after that, what do we have here? Yes, from around the same period. Here's a nice little piece. I'm not going to play it for you, but it's a delicious little piece that, again, people sort of neglect. No one really talks about it. It's very, very good. Carl Nielsen's Little Suite for Strings. This is a little 3-movement work. It's actually longer than some other serenades. It's like 20 minutes long. It's not a minor work. It was his first serious composition. It already has flashes of the Nielsen we've come to know and love. And it's interesting little melodies with their unusual harmonic quirks here and there. It's in 3 movements. It's delightful. Absolutely delightful. And the weightiest movement is at the end. It's interestingly structured. It shows that care for form that Nielsen always had, and sort of an originality of approach, even in this tiny little work. This one is the Bournemouth Sinfonietta under Richard Stutt. But you can. I like these performances very much because you also get the Holberg Suite, the Dag Viren Serenade, and Svensson's Melodies and Folk Songs. That's I'll show it up here so you can take a look at the cover and write it down if you're interested. But it's another really good Naxos recording. But I think if you want to get if you get Nielsen's orchestral music generally, you'll find it tucked away in collections of miscellaneous short orchestral works and things like that. So you can get it that way. But let's not overlook Carl Nielsen. I mean, he was a string player after all, Next. Oh, this one is so much fun. So much fun. Oh my goodness. Here's a piece that you probably don't know, but you really should. Victor Herbert's Serenade for Strings. This was composed around 1888, 1889, when he was still in Germany. And it's really, really luscious. I mean, it's yummy. The movements have titles. Let's see what the titles are. Let's see. It's Aufzug. Okay, fine. Polonaise. Liebesszene. Ooh, a Liebesszene. Yummy, yummy, yummy. And let's see, then there's a canzonetta and the finale. It's about 25 minutes. It's a very, very serious piece. And I just think it's wonderful. Herbert was a first-class composer. I know he made his living later writing operettas, which are very good, by the way. And the problem with his lack of attention is that there are very few orchestral works. There's, the cello concertos, and there's some pieces for cello and string orchestra here, which are also quite lovely. And then there are 3 pieces for string orchestra, which he wrote later. And there's the tone poem Hero and Leander, which is wonderful. And there's another suite for full orchestra, which is superb. And that about does it for his orchestral pieces. And I've done some research into Victor Herbert because Victor Herbert was a vibrato guy. He's fascinating. He actually indicated when to use it and when not to in many circumstances, which really, really not only gives lie to the, period instrument people who say that, vibrato wasn't used in that period, which is nonsense. But Victor Herbert's scores are potent evidence to the contrary. But the problem with making sense of him as a composer for the orchestra is that the operettas, which is where most of his orchestral music is, of course, they don't exist in score. I mean, they do. They only exist in vocal score. They exist in vocal scores and then parts. And the parts are all in boxes in the Library of Congress, for the most part. Tons and tons of unsorted boxes in the Library of Congress. And someday, somebody has to go through all this stuff and put together a genuine scholarly edition, because that's the only way we'll ever find out what he wrote and how he wrote it. Otherwise, you can only get piano vocal scores, which is actually what most people conducted the operettas from. Ugh, that's a horrible situation. And of course, they're all marked up, and who knows who did what, and it's a mess. But thank God for CPO, because CPO has Maximilian Hornung with the Südwestdeutsches Kammerorchestra Pforzheim. Oh, that's the cellist is Hornung, under Sebastian Tewinkel. Yeah. So, anyway, let's listen to a bit of the Liebesszene from Victor Herbert's Serenade for Strings. And oh, what a Liebesszene it is. Serious stuff, isn't it? Oh, it's beautiful. The whole piece is. All 5 fabulous movements. You need to get this Victor Herbert Music for String Orchestra. You owe it to yourself. Also, just introduce yourself to a really fine composer. People don't know. Then we come to about like 1892-ish. And in 1892, we get the Joseph Suk Serenade for Strings, based on the idea, the concept of Daddy Dvorak. It's a totally lovely work. I mean, he was also a very, very fine composer, even though his output was somewhat slim. And especially after Dvorak and his wife passed away, I mean, he had a tragic life. But boy, was he a good composer. And the Serenade is a worthy successor to Dvorak's. Dvorak thought so, and that's what matters. Anyway, here's a little bit of the finale. This is with the Czech Philharmonic under Libor Pešek on Supraphon. This is the Denon Supraphon one, but you can also find it in that Pešek Gold Edition box on Supraphon, which you really should get because it's got some great stuff in it, including a marvelous Bruckner 7th and some other really fine stuff. So here is the finale of Joseph Suk's Serenade for Strings. You see, the jewels just keep on coming, don't they? There's no end to the delightfulness of this music. There's so much of it. It's amazing. I've had such a good time putting this together. I mean, it took me a long time to do it because I kept stopping to listen to everything over and over. I was having so much fun, especially Robert Fuchs. Wow, is he a find? I'm telling you, that guy is a find. Also a find, and equally delightful, really, really charming, is this sucker. Let's see. Yes, Karlowicz. Mieczysław Karlowicz, Polish composer from 1876 to 1909. He did not live that long. He wrote a healthy pile of orchestral music, most of which has been recorded by Naxos. This excellent disc has the violin concerto with Ilya Koller, a sensational violinist with the Warsaw Philharmonic, and Anthony Witt, who we all know and love. And the Serenade Opus 2 is also just, I mean, you know, I keep saying it's delightful, it's delicious, it's lovely, it's the Serenade. It is. What can I say? It's just wonderful. Listen to this opening. It'll just charm the woes of your life away. It's an incantation for happiness. It's a march, actually. And here it is. See what I mean? Don't you want to just run, not walk, and grab it for yourself? Absolutely terrific. Absolutely terrific. But we're going to wrap it up with something I don't need to play you any of because you know it by heart. You probably all have the disc. We're going to end this particular talk with Elgar. We need to end with Elgar because his Serenade for Strings also dates from the early 1890s, and then there's the Introduction and Allegro and some of those other, Sospiri and a couple short pieces that he wrote that are absolutely gorgeous. Now, the Introduction and Allegro is a major masterpiece. It really is. It's a fabulous piece of music. It was composed in 1905. So that's the long 19th century, the long 19th century on the other end. I may have said 18th before, I meant 19th, but the long 19th century goes to 1905. After that, we're going to have to deal with other composers, and there's going to be another talk. We have to. We have to do a 20th century thing. And frankly, I think there may be two. We may have to do the 20th century, and we may have to do just British, because after Elgar's Serenade and Introduction and Allegro, and of course the Vaughan Williams Tallis Fantasia, the British string orchestra tradition became a cottage industry over there with major masterpieces composed in the medium and also on the continent and in the United States. There were wonderful, wonderful works. So this recording of it is, of course, John Barbaroli with the New Philharmonia and the Sinfonia of London. It's such a great disc. One of the great Tallis Fantasias. And then these Elgar works, which have never been bettered. The Serenade is just beautiful, lovely, relaxed and serene and touching, and at times filled with just a hint of pathos. It's totally Elgar. And of course, like I said, the Introduction and Allegro is a major masterpiece, and you have to have them. And so with Elgar, we wrap up this talk. We're going to do more. There has to be more. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say about these pieces. I would really like it if you would spend a little time listening to some of the music you don't know and get back to me with your impressions of it, because it is marvelous, marvelous stuff. Now, with all of these sound clips and things that we're playing, this is going to be a very long video. So thank you for sticking with it as long as you have. I really appreciate it. Keep on listening, folks. Take care. Thank you.